Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, October 25th. Also a great pleasure to be joined today by two friends, colleagues, editors. Cherise Forbes is with us here today. She is the managing editor at the Manchester Journal, and online we have Greg Sukiennik, who is now a news editor at the Berkshire Eagle. Cherise, Greg, great to have you with us today.
It's great to be back.
Well, this feels like old home week here, or something like that. It's great. Um, I just thought we could start by talking about some of the major stories you've both been covering. Greg, let me begin with you. What's some of the things that you've been covering down in Pittsfield in that area?
Well, the past year and a half have been, largely doing a lot of coverage of the ongoing efforts to clean up the Housatonic River of PCBs that were discharged into the river during General Electric's manufacturing days here in Pittsfield. Also, was really, in addition to editing the paper a couple days a week, has sort of transitioned into more of a full-time writing role. Some of the things I've covered lately, an historic building in Pittsfield that's nearing its end and useful life. The return of some World War II veterans whose remains were discovered in the Philippines and Guadalcanal, like 80 years after they had died, in combat. Just also in just really whatever sort of it's very much the same as any newspaper reporter. It's kind of what comes across your desk becomes your focus that day, and it's what makes the business fun, is that it's never the same day twice.
Absolutely, boy, no kidding. And Cherise, what are some of the stories you've been following up here in the North Shire?
Yeah, I can say a lot of the same. It's kind of a mixed bag of news lately, but there's no shortage of it. The town governments have been very busy lately. The Housing Task Force just heard a really exciting proposal for 450 new housing units. But of course, that's just an idea at this point. There's no developer, there's no formal plans. They're really just talking things out, but that's always a good place to start, and I know people are very excited about that one. And of course, as it gets colder and as we get closer to the holidays, there's a lot of community news to share as well. So, good mix.
That housing story really does sound quite interesting. It's a very big project, 450 units, something like that is the idea.
And much needed. I mean, we've been talking about a shortage of housing in Manchester and the surrounding area for a very long time, and there's a very distinct need. There's a whole housing task force. I think this is the third or fourth housing task force actually the town has had. So it's clearly a big issue, and it's one that I think a lot of people, as I said, are excited to see some brainstorming, some motion happening on, and this is a really fleshed out proposal with a lot of different angles considered, so I'm excited to see where it goes.
Greg, down in Pittsfield, is housing as big an issue as it is up here?
It absolutely is. Actually, we've added a housing reporter on a 2-year grant, Claire O'Callahan, and so she's hit the ground running. We have similar issues, cost, a number of houses being bought with cash, the supply issues that I dealt with, and that you're still dealing with in Manchester and the North Shire. We also have like Manchester, good part of the Berkshires is tourism, second home territory, and so that doesn't leave a whole lot of stock for affordable workforce housing.
So that sounds very similar to some of the issues we've been talking about for quite a while up here.
Feels quite familiar.
Yeah, workforce, cost of construction, cost of housing, lack of housing certainly in the affordable workforce range. Anyway, I mean, and Teresa, of course, another big issue that's a hardy perennial up here is the education question, and the Taconic and Green Regional School District has been holding some listening sessions, I guess they're called, in the 5 towns where they have schools. There was a big one up in Danby last week, I think.
Yeah, just a couple of days ago, and it's really an issue that goes back to when you were editor. I think Randy Lowe, the superintendent of the BRSU at that first meeting, held up a copy of the journal from when you were editor, talking about these same problems, that there is a need for a unified middle school, larger class sizes, more interchange between students, but there's also a lot of financial and logistical issues with the school facilities themselves and the work that they need going forward. So between that and the rising property taxes and the politics around that especially, it's a big topic of conversation this year. And those forums, they've done 3, they've got 2 more, depending on when this airs. So it'll be a lot of community feedback for that board to then distill and hopefully come up with a plan that people can get behind.
And that all seems like it's happening at a very difficult moment with the property tax situation being what it is, and school taxes on the rise. To try, I guess they're trying to right size, I suppose you could say, the Taconic and Green, and perhaps close 1 or maybe even 2 schools, and then readjust the enrollment so that the buildings are a little more fully occupied.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning enrollment, because that's a big part of that puzzle too. It's been declining. I think about 10% is the figure that Randy shared in the forum so far. So that's a big conversation that's going to keep going forward. And of course, no one wants to see their property taxes go up, and no one wants to see their local school close either. So everyone, I think, is behind a bit of a rock and a hard place on this one.
These are the tough conversations, I believe, that our political representatives warned us about when the property tax bills came out.
Yeah.
Greg, I'm just wondering, education, I'm thinking, must be an issue down in Pittsfield as well. And
Some similar issues.
Some of the same dynamics in play.
Yeah, well, there's slightly different dynamics because we have a couple of urban centers. So the school districts around them are rural districts, much like Taconic and Green. So, but in this case, because you have that urban center and because we have school choice, a different kind of school choice here in Massachusetts than folks are accustomed to in the North Shire. So that's led to an outmigration of students from the Pittsfield schools to the surrounding schools, such as Lenox, Lee, Mount Greylock, the Central Berkshire Regional School District, and Dalton. So, I mean, that's a significant issue. We're also talking about the possibility of ending our statewide test as a graduation requirement. That's going to be a ballot issue on election day. But listening to Cherise talk about, sort of property taxes and school populations, so I said a couple of minutes ago that it's never the same day twice, but that's still true. But some of the songs still sound pretty familiar. Let's just put it that way. Some of the same issues do manage to stretch out over time.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a really difficult adjustment. I think we're all going to have to make, certainly up here in Vermont, I would imagine in Massachusetts or in Berkshire County as well, where the idea of having a local elementary school, at least in your town, has kind of always been considered.
I mean, there are declining enrollments here as well. I mean, the town where I live, Adams, and North Adams, combined, their 2 high schools had 100 graduates last school year. And, when my wife graduated, both, had graduating classes in the hundreds. So, yeah, there's questions about consolidation here as well. And that sort of rings a bell for everyone who went through Act 46. So, same song, different key.
Well, and the beat will go on for sure to drag out the metaphor even further. I guess I just wanted, Greg, what's been the difference you found so far reporting for the Berkshire Eagle compared to the work you did up here with the Banner and the Journal? Is it basically the same thing? You're going out there, you're covering the beat, you're writing your stories, and
it's basically the same. It's basically the same, Andrew. I guess the one thing is that the Journal being more of a smaller community focused. I mean, although there's never any shortage of towns to get to. It's like, you spend a day and you spend a couple of weeks, behind the desk, and then wonder, geez, I really haven't covered anything in Dorset lately. I wonder what's going on in Danby. But we have 32 cities and towns that we cover. And so we tend to be a lot more big picture and do more sort of focus on issue stories. And although our towns, like towns in Vermont, are very different from each other, there are a lot of the same themes that run across, housing being one of them, education being one of them. So it's not that different. It still has some community focus too, which is good. I mean, that's probably what I really, we'll get to that in a bit. What I enjoyed most about Manchester was that community focus. I mean, being able to write about a long lost veteran coming home, and to see the community turn out with flags and sort of, despite the fact that no one alive knew this fella, who, was, died in combat in Guadalcanal 6 days after he arrived with the Marines. You just sort of get a sense of that community feeling that I enjoyed so much in Manchester.
Interesting. Yeah, because Pittsfield is a much bigger town than Manchester or
Yeah,
or
I mean,
Bennington, right? Whatever.
It's my hometown. But the funny thing is when you come back, home after 25 years, you have to be careful not to make assumptions about what you think and what's actually changed. So Pittsfield's the same in a lot of ways, but Pittsfield's also really different in a lot of ways too.
Well, I was wondering, since we have two former, one present editor of the journal here, it would be fun to kind of just talk about what our experiences were like when we were sitting in the hot seat like Cherise is doing at the moment. And kind of just reflect on some of the changes that we've seen and maybe speculate a bit on where it's all going to the extent that we can, since where it's all going seems to change every 3 or 4 months anyway. But I guess I was just thinking, I guess I'll get it started here. I first became the editor back in 2006, which, well, that was only 18 years ago. It seems like about half a lifetime at this point. And back then we were located over on Memorial Avenue in a building there, right across the street from MEMS. We had staff, I think it was me and like 5 other people, one other editor, one reporter, an office manager, a couple of copy editors, because at that point they were still getting typewritten press releases coming in that had to be cured or fixed or whatever. And it was very much, a small town paper, and we published 1 print paper a week, unlike today. That seemed like a huge hurdle to get over. I can't imagine, Cherise, what you have to do now with putting out five online editions plus a print paper. And I guess, what comes to mind as I think back on it, it was how irrelevant the whole online world seemed at the time. I think we had a website at that point. I don't really remember for sure, because I don't remember us ever worrying very much about posting anything to it. That did change by the time we got, I would say, up to about 2010, and that became a thing where we paid a little more attention to it, but if we got a story posted before it got into the print version, great. If we didn't, whatever. And at around that same time, actually in 2009 was when the first big staff reduction took place, and we lost the office manager, and we lost the assistant editor, and it became just me and one other reporter. We'd have some freelancers help us out from time to time, but that was very erratic. We then got a second reporter, that's right, so there was 3 of us doing reporting work at that point, as well as putting the paper together, which was an interesting process. We had gotten to that point of being electronic at that point, but I remember many late Wednesday nights copy editing things and filling them out, and then that evolved also. I guess the big thing that happened after that was how the online piece, the website, and then by, I'd say, 2013, 2014, the social media, Facebook mainly, but also Instagram and Twitter, as it was called back then, became a much bigger part of the whole operation. It seems like so incredibly antiquated when I think about it now, compared to what you guys wound up doing later. And Greg, let me turn it over to you at that point, because you came in after me in 2016, and what do you remember back?
Well, it was odd because I came from an all digital environment and found myself back into a situation where there was 1 print publication a week, but no shortage of things to do, but certainly a shortage of people to do those things. I had sort of 3/5 of a reporter shared with the Bennington Banner. That would have been Michaela McGeaney, and then later along, Cherise, and I guess the big change was actually coming from an all digital environment into a place where someone actually once told me, "Why did you put that story online? I wanted to read it in the paper first." That kind of took me by surprise. Uh, but um, I think it was interesting for me because it was having been sort of more of a national um, uh, media scene for 15 years, and coming back to something that was hyper local was a bit of a change. And but it was a refreshing change because suddenly it was back in an environment where if you walked into a what was it? It was a Mardi Gras dinner in the church basement at the Dorset and East Rupert Unified Church. And they gave me beads and hugged me like I was like a long lost friend, and just for showing up and taking pictures of their Shrove Tuesday feast. It was that's a warm memory. And another one where I visited Mrs. Nickerson's class at MEMS, and looked at the back of the door and saw that every story we had written about MEMS that year was framed on construction paper on the door. It's like, wow, like what we do here really, really matters. And I guess that sort of helps fuel you when you're sort of writing a lot of the stories and editing a lot of the stories on your own. So the shift to digital, the continuing emphasis on digital really sort of, I think, continued and grew in my time as editor. And so the very end of that was when the Vermont News and Media made the decision to go to e-editions, which were a bit of a challenge, but also allowed for a different pace. You know how, like, running a weekly, it's kind of a boom bust environment where you've got all this ton of work that you have to try to get done by Wednesday, and then Thursday you're exhausted, and there's not much to do anyway because there's no paper until Friday, and then it just kind of starts over again. I think the one thing about the e-edition, though, I will say, is that it did afford a more even flow of copy. That you had a set of things to do today, but those things were then done. So it sort of forced you to actually kind of stay on target and get copy out the door. I mean, that said, having the weekly edition be something special, I think there's sort of a push-pull to that. And I was sort of, and that's where I leave off.
So, Cherise, bring us up to speed on the present. Now, the journal is published 5 times a week, 5 digital versions, 1 print version on Friday. What's that like?
We're kind of between two worlds right now. We do have that print edition, and people still hold that really dearly. Like Greg said, that's what gets cut out and framed on people's walls, and that really does matter to people. And there is a desire to see a lot of our best local news in that weekly edition. So it's always a game of balance and efficiency. We have much less staff than what you just mentioned. You're pretty much looking at our news team. We've got great contributors, especially Danielle Crozier from the Bennington Banner. She is my A-team reporter. She does a lot of our community news and really captures the heart of this community in a lot of wonderful pieces. We work a lot with the Reformer as well, and a lot of our local colleagues and freelancers. But, we still get those handwritten press releases brought in that I'm typing out and managing the email inbox and all those logistical pieces too. So it's really a sprint and a marathon at the same time, I guess.
Yeah.
And
I don't get too many handwritten press releases anymore, I have to say.
A few, yeah. It's always a surprise, but we make it work. But some things you'll see is, like, every week in the print edition, we have a special section that I try to run every single week, which is what you missed in our edition. So for the folks that maybe haven't caught up to the fact that there are 5 papers a week and that they're in this sort of innovative digital format, we try to give that reminder every single week and help people see that there is news coming out, as Greg said, on a daily basis. And that also gives us a lot of opportunities for breaking news coverage as well, which we've tried to lean into these last couple of years, I think, and step that up a bit.
So what are your deadlines like at this point? I mean, I'm thinking back again to the misty past and thinking there were many nights typing things up at 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. But is a deadline, but I'm just wondering if to get the digital version out, you probably need to have all the copy written much earlier than that.
It's exactly the same in terms of process. We still work with the Design Hub, actually out of the Berkshire Eagle. They're a really wonderful team, and they do great work for us, with us, I should say. But that process it takes time and it takes effort. So every day at 3 p.m. is our news deadline, and by 5 p.m. is when they are sending those pages out to either be paginated for the e-edition or for the print paper. So I'm glad that I grew up on a farm, because it's a lot of early mornings rather than late nights for me. So, at late meetings, more often than not, out of self-preservation, I'll cover out of Zoom nowadays and things like that. But it's, important to me to get out in the community as much as I can as well. So, again, balance and efficiency are key terms right now.
Well, you're doing a
I will
great
say
job.
that Zoom kind of made it a game changer. That's another sort of change that came along with the pandemic, made it possible for me to cover the State House for a year and a half, made it possible to sit at home and watch a meeting instead of, trudging out.
That's a big
When you're sort of, when you've been working all day and you're, a little past your best self, you can sort of kind of take it in, or watch it the next day and zip through to the parts that have the most news value.
Yeah, it's a game changer. Things have evolved along with us in a lot of ways, which is a godsend.
So where do you both see it all going in the future? I mean, both Greg at a paper like the Eagle and Cherise at the Journal. Is it going to just continue to be more and more digital, and is the print edition going to just sort of fade away completely? I mean, its demise has been forecast for so long. I'm kind of half amazed there still are print papers, and grateful for that, because yes, I'm one of these old timers that really does prefer reading the news in a print format. And I'm kind of, as I'm asking this, I'm thinking, we've got an election underway where the role of the news media has been kind of a bit of a topic in terms of the news silos that we seem to be drifting into as a nation, I guess, and I'm sure not the only one. But whereas in the past, you'd have a Walter Cronkite figure or 3 major television networks that gave you the news. Everyone watched that. We all got our information more or less in the same place and formed our opinions that we formed them, but basically the news sources were the same. Now, of course, we got one group of people reading the New York Times, another group of people reading the New York Post, to go quickly do a Rupert Murdoch thing, or Fox versus CNN, and it's a much more siloed kind of situation, it seems like. I guess I just wonder, what do you both think is kind of where this is all going to head? Any thoughts on that?
Every day. We've seen growth in our digital subscriptions. And that said, we still have a printing press, which, that puts us, sort of in a different section of newspapers. There are fewer of those these days. So we wind up printing other people's papers because they have no press to go to anymore, and had sent theirs away a long time ago. There are still a core group of people who appreciate the newspaper, and I wonder if it's going to be something like vinyl records, where it might be a bit of a niche, but it's an important one and still enough that it merits publication. And maybe it goes back to, sort of like the Journal, where it's weekly or biweekly, as opposed to a daily. I know that the Eagle publishes a weekend edition and then doesn't publish a paper edition on Monday. We used to be a 7-day-a-week newspaper, back my first tour of duty here in the 90s. I don't think the online product, because another thing about the online product is shorter attention spans and more attention to social media means you have to sort of try to figure out ways to be where those readers are. And there's kind of a conflict between, okay, well, is it always going to be sort of the meme, sort of 15-second snack that doesn't provide any context? Or do you sort of insist on the print journalism, but no one's going to read through 30 inches of detail about a select board meeting? So I think we've got to sort of find a way to forward that difference, and maybe we're good at trying to have too few people doing too much work, but I think we have to sort of do our best to meet readers where they are.
Any final thoughts on that, Cherise?
I think this is one case where the Journal is maybe ahead of the curve a little bit in this once-a-week print and regularly online format, because it gives people who don't or aren't able to pay a subscription the opportunity to grab our newspaper on a Friday and see what's going on in their community with no cost to them. And I think that's really valuable and a really great contribution that we can make. And I think that as time goes forward, we hope to see more people buying those subscriptions and paying for more news. That's how we're going to get back to that news staff that you had mentioned, Andrew, and hopefully keep growing from here. But I think that balance between digital and print is going to be even more important, and maybe as the journal is, more skewed towards digital going forward.
Mm. Well, I'll just say you're doing a great job at it, and I think your work and Greg's work underscore how important a hometown newspaper is, I think, to a community, to the cohesiveness of a community. I think when folks are at least able to read about a select board meeting or a planning commission meeting in their local paper and keep up to speed on what's going on, that's I think we're seeing just how important that is. Because a lot of communities are losing their hometown papers. I mean, I keep reading these frightening statistics about how every week there's two papers that have closed somewhere, and usually a small town, and it's like you just go, wow, where are people going to get their information from now? Some dark hole on the internet, I guess.
Fighting like hell to keep the journal alive, but I'm glad I had two great mentors behind me.
Well, and we had some mentors before us. Well, Greg, I know we have to make a hard stop at 11 o'clock because you're on deadline and you've got to finish the story, right? So
yes. Well, I just want to say, thank you for having me along, and I also want to say, I've been reading the journal on a regular basis, and Cherise, things seem to be going very well for you. Keep up the awesome work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, all right, we'll have to leave it there. But Greg, I'm sure we'll get you back on Press Pass one of these days again.
Absolutely.
So you can keep us up to speed on what's happening down in Pittsfield and Berkshire County. So thank you very much for making the time for it. And we'll let you go so you can get back to work on that story there that
all right.
Must get done.
Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. Hope you found the program interesting. Also want to thank Cherise Forbes, Managing Editor of the Manchester Journal, for being with us and sharing her thinking on all of this. So anyway, it's Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.